Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Robert.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right, folks. There might be a few more people popping in, but it's probably good for us to get started. Welcome to our first CRE workshop for the Synod. This is our first year doing it. There's Robert. Hooray, it worked. And we'll let him get in here. He already knows who I am, so that's okay. So again, my name is Tim Pollock. I'm the CRE coordinator for the Synod of the Covenant. This is only my second year in this position. So one of the things that we wanted to try and pilot for this year are a series of what we're calling continuing education workshops. You'll notice that our first is Robert. We're doing leadership as a process. And if you like Robert so much that you want to do more with him, he's coming back in June to do a little bit more on leadership. We also have Minister of Word and Sacrament out of Michigan who's certified in emotional intelligence. She'll be doing two different workshops on emotional intelligence, how it works, how it functions, that sort of thing. And then I'm going to dip into my past. Some of you might know that I used to be a instructor of communication studies, and I'll be bringing in some elements of small group communication. As I affirmed at our Synod Assembly meeting, I asked our stated clerk, I used to be a stated clerk too. I said, Fran, how often does the word councils show up in our polity, in our book of words? She says, so I can't answer that, but it's a lot. All that is to say that almost everything we do in the work of the church, particularly in the Presbyterian church, is in small group. And so it's helpful to kind of know how those elements, and if you look at it as leadership, small group, and emotional intelligence, they all connect really closely to each other in kind of different aspects of how we lead together as the church. So I would like to officially introduce our leader today, our instructor. This is Dr. Robert M. McManus, and he is the Executive Director of Business and Applied Leadership and Professor of Leadership at Muskingum University here in Ohio. He is the co-author of Understanding Leadership, an Arts and Humanities Perspective, and is the lead editor of Ethical Leadership, a primer. He is an award-winning educator and has traveled extensively teaching leadership. He is also a certified executive coach. Robert holds a PhD in communication and a Master of Business Administration. And I will also add that Robert is a delightful person. So,
Well,
yeah, go ahead, Robert. Sorry.
thank you for that last piece, Tim. I do appreciate the vote of confidence. I try to be a delightful person. I don't know if I always make that.
So I'll be your guy in the chair. I'm right here listening in. I'll just I'll go ahead and go to mute and turn off my video, and I'll just kind of monitor email. And if anything, if I get any messages, I'll pass them on. I'll just text them to you. But I'll just be right here in case you guys all need something.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everybody. When Tim asked me to do this a few months ago, I jumped at the chance. I actually grew up in the church, not the Presbyterian church, but another denomination. And my dad was a minister and stayed in the same church for 50 years. Preached his last sermon when he was 85 years old. So have been certainly around that particular type of culture and that nonprofit organization and a place of faith for much of my young life, and certainly have a deep respect for what you do. So I'm very, very happy to be here today. Um, I know a little bit about the Synod. I know a little bit about the Presbyterian Church. Uh, would you mind just very briefly just telling me a little bit about yourself and your roles in the church? And then we'll launch into the presentation a little bit more systematically. But I'd like to just to get to know you a little bit more. I'm just going to, if you don't mind, and I call out to the first person that's kind of on my screen in the row here. Um, Gidget, where are you and what's your role?
I live currently in Dayton, Ohio by Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, yay
Yes.
military. And my role is the CRE pastor at 7 Mile Presbyterian Church, which is just north of Hamilton. Think Mayberry. It is a very small village.
Okay.
There's no lights or anything, a couple of stop signs, and I absolutely love it. I was born military, married military. Our son is military. We have 2 kids, 6 grandchildren. I'm a huge Beatles fan, and I play bridge a lot for my own self, just to get away. And I love Jose, so I'm so glad to see him on here too.
Well, it is very nice to meet you. Roger?
Hi, Roger Seibert. I'm from Massillon, Ohio.
Yes.
I am CRE here at Massillon Central Presbyterian Church. Actually, the role I'm in, I took this over last summer, uh, hoping it to be sort of a transitional position as we try to form a committee, a PNC, to go out and search for a called pastor. So
Mhm.
that's my role here. I stepped into it. I had just retired from my normal working job in the spring, and this came up, and I had the CRE training, so I felt called to step into this. So um, having a lot of fun with it, and it is a challenging experience to say the least, but I'm looking forward to the seminar today. So
Great. Nice to meet you.
nice to meet you too.
Christine.
Yes. Um, I am actually currently commissioned presbytery wide at the Scioto Valley Presbytery. Um, I can do pulpit supply and administer sacraments any place or moderate meetings, as requested. So that is what I'm doing. I have primarily served, I've been a CRE officially trained since 2013, although I started serving small churches while I was in training in 2011. So I've served in probably some of our smallest churches, and including the one that I had a key to the outhouse because there's no running water, and
Yep.
in Appalachian, Ohio.
Yep.
And then I served for 8 years at Fredericktown Presbyterian Church, which is near where I was born and raised. And now I live about 2 miles from the high school that I graduated from with my husband Carl and my dog and 3 cats. And we live in a gated community, and it's a rural gated community. And I'm, as I said before, I'm going to be entering. I thought I was retiring at 70, and suddenly I have this call to help this other church in the next presbytery over, which is just about 6 or 7 miles for me. So, kind of break down that presbytery geographical line thing to try to get maybe a new model for some of our churches to work together. Because on this end of the presbytery, east, west, and central, the central most north of our presbytery is also 6 miles from where I'm going to be serving. So, so there's some possibilities of, figuring out that kind of thing out. And I'm transitionally trained both for local and mid council. So
Okay. Lori.
Well, good morning. I guess I'm the one that's a little mentally dyslexic because I am a ruling elder commissioner as opposed to a commissioned ruling elder. So apologies there. I will fess up and say I have been married to a PCUSA pastor for about 42 years. So I've been around this kind of stuff maybe by osmosis. And I serve in the Brooklyn, Michigan Presbyterian Church, recently led the interim pastor search, and now working through the mission study as we are looking for our next installed pastor. And just very delighted to see a leadership training opportunity. And I love the concept of leadership as a process. So that's why I said, oh, I'd really like to go to that. So thanks for letting me.
Great. We're happy to have you here. Tom?
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, my name Tom Billman. My CRE journey is a retirement plan, some
Okay.
retirement plan, huh? Um, but it's been a joy so far. I am the head pastor, only pastor, solo pastor at Hogue Memorial Presbyterian Church, which is an inner city church here in Columbus, Ohio, in one of the worst
Oh,
neighborhoods in the city. We are living, breathing Matthew 25 church. We have a food pantry that feeds 300 families a month. We have a free meal on Saturday night that we offer to the neighborhood, where we get a lot of homeless and addicted and people in need. And it has been such a wonderful journey to be part of this urban renewal of Columbus. It's a very challenging position, but I've been there since 18, so I guess I'm entering now my seventh year. So very pleased to be with you.
well, it's nice to have you here. Thank you. Jose.
Morning, everyone. I'm coming back to life after a bad cold, bad winter cold. I'm from College Hill Community Church here in Dayton, Ohio, and we are in transition between pastors. I'm an elder, and we too are living the Matthew 25 vision and endeavoring to live the Matthew 25 vision. And I am leading evangelism and outreach. We missed our first back to after vacation children's program. We have a tutoring program that meets at the church, and that's breathing life into our congregation in its revival after in this transition. And so,
Excuse me. Oh, it's nice to meet
I
you.
guess it's catchy even over the internet.
It is. I caught it over the internet. Robert.
Good morning. I'm Bob Gustafson. I'm a commissioned pastor at West Berlin Presbyterian Church, which is just north of Columbus in southern Delaware County. I'm completing or working towards my 10th year as a commissioned pastor here. I'm a retired Ohio State College of Engineering faculty member.
Yes.
Doing this as another little bit longer than I might have expected, even second or third career. West Berlin is about to celebrate its 150th anniversary, and I hope we make it through it.
Well, it's really, thank you for taking the time just to introduce yourselves and for me to learn a little bit about each of you. I think that that'll help also just facilitate our conversations in this presentation, to know a little bit about where you're coming from, what your organizations or your churches are like. There will be some time for some community sharing amongst ourselves. There also will be some time for pairing up with people and just talking about the unique situations of your church as it relates to leadership as a process. So I thank you for taking that time. I'm going to go ahead once again, share my screen. And you should be able to see that leadership as a process there. Yes, good. I'm going to go ahead and leave the slides up on the side because that will allow me to just kind of move through them a little bit more seamlessly. So I wanted to start with our agenda for today. And this is I'm going to say a basic agenda. We're going to talk about leadership as a process, but specifically about developing the leader, empowering the follower, understanding the context, and achieving the goal. And we will talk about each of these elements of the process today. I will commit to you to have a break every hour. So you can, have a bio break, check your email, whatever you need to do. And then we'll have the chance to, come back. It may not always be on the top of the hour, but pretty close to it. I just think that when you're starting a Zoom call like this, you want to know that you're going to have some breaks coming up. So we definitely will have those. If you don't already, I'd like you to grab a pen and paper because I'm going to ask you to jot some things down throughout the presentation today. And the first thing that I'd like you to jot down actually is a picture. So what comes to your mind when I ask you to draw a picture? It can be stick figures, it could be a symbol. It doesn't have to be a work of art. But what comes to your mind when I ask you, what is leadership? Just take a 30 seconds to sketch something out there. I won't even ask you to show it to me. I am going to ask you to verbally describe it. But what comes to your mind when I ask you to draw a picture in answer to the question, what is leadership? Take about, I don't know, 10 more seconds. Like I said, it doesn't have to be a work of art. It's really just getting our minds going on this topic. I'll call on somebody. Gidget, what did you draw?
I drew stick figures, a group of people who were talking together and smiling.
Okay, so there's an implication of a camaraderie, a joy, a happiness in that process, a getting along together. Good. Jose, what did you draw?
I have a group of stick people. I'm not as quick as Gidget. Moving together.
Okay, moving together. So there's a destination. There is a purpose for them, and they're not scattered. They're unified in their goal. Okay, excellent. I'll ask one more. Tom, what did you have?
Yes, I had a stick figure of myself, and then I was walking along a road that led to the cross.
Okay, so it's a journey. There is a specific destination, and the destination is specifically faith-based, which would probably be something that would be very applicable to all of us on this call, right? Is that we're all in some way moving towards that ultimate goal of serving God. If I were, is that an accurate read, Tom, or would you add to that?
That is. It was also the idea of bringing people to God, to Christ as well.
Okay, so bringing people together as a goal. Excellent.
Yes.
I wanted to start with that just to kind of get our minds flowing. I want you to take a look at this next picture here. So this is a famous painting that I'm sure you're familiar with. It's by Edmund Lutz. It's Washington Crossing the Delaware. I'll tell you a little bit about that painting. So Lutz actually painted this because he wanted to see his native Germany emulate the American experience. And there's a few things that I'll point out in this painting. Maybe I will make this just a little larger for this conversation. Okay, so a few things that you'll see here. One, let me ask instead of tell. What do you think is the central figure of this painting? Yeah, absolutely.
For me, the central figures of the painting are the two people in the very front guiding the ship. the boat.
Okay, these two people here.
Well, I'm actually talking about the rowers.
Ah, okay, these two people here. All right.
Yeah,
All right. A little bit about that. So when
yeah,
Luke stated,
yeah. I mean, it's rocky. I mean, it's a rocky existence. They've got that, the water is roiling around there, and they're trying to keep that boat guided, keeping their leader safe, but keeping that boat guided in the right direction.
okay, so they are, I'm going to say, would you call them the leader, or would you call Washington and Madison here the leader?
Well, I would say Washington and Madison are the leader, but they're the ones that are empowered to do the work.
Okay, I like that, and that's what I wanted to point out is you certainly do have the leader Washington here as the central figure, but Washington did not cross the Delaware on his own, right? You had all of these people, and in fact, Lutz, it's very interesting. Uh, the people in this boat were actually purposely put in the costumes, if you were, in order to send a message. So you've got a Scotsman here, you have a frontiersman wearing a coonskin hat, you have a freed enslaved person, Prince Whipple here, you have a Native American in the back. He really wanted to show the body politic of the United States as this collection of people from various areas, right? And I really like the way that you pointed out that these were the people, I'm going to say, doing the work. That there's Washington, Madison here. So I would say there's these leaders and there's these followers. But there is I'm going to call a symbiotic relationship between them. They need each other. Um, what else do you see in this picture? Anybody?
The flag.
Yeah. So the flag is actually the apex of the picture. Who said the flag? I'm sorry,
That was Tom. That was me.
Tom. So Tom, this is an honest question for you. So the flag is the apex of the picture. Do you find it to be the central focus of the picture, or do you think Washington is the central focus of the picture?
I actually thought the flag was.
Yeah, so I think that a uh, an accurate reading is that the flag is representing the goal, right? In here, that the goal is why this leader and these followers are coming together. You don't necessarily see the battle. So this a little bit history of the painting. It was painted on, of course, after the war, but it was of a famous battle where Washington crossed the Delaware and surprised the Hessian army. And it was on a Christmas Eve night. The enemy did not think that anyone would be attacking at that time. And you also have some religious, I'm going to say, a doff of the hat in some ways. So you can see the moonlight here, but it almost casts a heavenly glow on Washington, um, and kind of a blessing on this picture. So what you have here is a leader working with followers to achieve this goal in a very particular context, and the context happens to be the Revolutionary War. I do think that the leader in this is given a great deal of, I'm going to say honor, probably even more so than the others. I went to this one too quickly. So that's one view of leadership, right? And I would call this a very leader-centric view of leadership. So this is the next one I wanted to show you. This painting is equally as famous, and it is it's really a symbol of France, right? This is called Liberty Leading the People, July 28th. It is about one of the, I think the last edition, if you will, of the French Revolution. And you've got some different things that are going on here. So this was painted by Eugene Delacroix. In fact, when he painted it, it was considered so incendiary that it was hidden away for 40 years, and it now hangs in the Louvre Museum. But you've got some different aspects here. In this painting, who's the leader? You can just call it out. I don't need to call on your
Lady
hand.
Liberty
looks like-
appears to be.
Yeah, the woman
Yeah,
Yeah,
carrying the flag.
the woman, yeah.
absolutely. That's right. So this is Lady Liberty. She is a goddess. So it is a metaphorical representation of a leader. One early theorist would have called this the invisible leader, or what we would call the goal, right? And you have different things that this is saying here. Just to tell you a little bit about the painting, this is actually the painter, Eugene Delacroix. He decided to paint for his country, and he painted himself into this painting. You have here a woman at the feet of Lady Liberty. You did not see women in the previous painting. This is a direct reference to the role that women played in the French Revolution. She actually is wearing this little Fijian cap, which is also mirrored by Lady Liberty. You have the fighting men, who would be the sans-culottes. You have the royal guard. You have children who have literally stripped the ammunition and guns off the royal guard. And you have both the royal guard and the everyday man lying dead at the feet of this revolution. In the background, you can just barely see it. This is Notre Dame, and there's a little tricolor flag hanging off of it, and Paris is in flames. So how do you see this painting and what it's saying different from Washington crossing the Delaware?
There's a lot more violence and conflict in this.
Yes, there is a lot more violence. Absolutely. It's interesting because the context for both Revolutionary Wars, but where this one, I would say it's very strategic. There is a clear chain of command, if you will, between leaders and followers. This one is much more chaotic. And you don't have a physical leader, you have this representation of the goal being the leader. What else do you see between these paintings that are different?
The painting of Washington, I'm sorry,
Go ahead.
the painting of Washington were military troops, and this one seems to be everyone.
Yes, it's
No children
interesting.
in this one, no women in this one.
There are no children, there are no women. They are everyday people, right? But they obviously have military commanders. Where here it really is everybody, women, children, rich, poor, all in the streets. I would say the other thing that I was noticed in comparison is that this painting really elevates the goal. I mean, this is a spirit of liberty. She's not a physical person. But some things to notice, her dress is torn. She is carrying a gun. She's calling people behind to follow her. It is much more of that. If I were to go back to, I think it was Tom's original painting or drawing, that idea of the cross, right, is kind of the invisible leader in that painting, where there's more a physical leader. So yes, please, Christine.
And she is commanding leadership.
Yes, talk to me a little bit more about that, about what she's doing.
She is commanding. She is actually leading these people. In Washington crossing the Delaware, he is sort of static. I'm here to be guide, I'm here and I'm your fearless leader, but I'm expecting you to do whatever. And she's taking a commanding. She's just saying boldly, and the colors in it. I don't know what is this, a flag up here in the very top, and it matches
the French
and
flag.
it matches the sash on the woman right below. And there's just something in that she's, yes, in all the old art, there's nothing wrong with semi-nudity or nudity, but she's boldly taking lead, even as a woman with a torn dress. I bet I'm in charge here. It's not just a look.
No, I mean, that's right. And yet, in reality, she's a spirit. Right? Where here it is a definite figure.
Yeah.
So I think that in both you have a leader, a follower, a goal, and the context. But here, the goal is much more prominent. And I would also say here that you don't have a physical leader, so the followers are much more prominent in this. So here's my question to you. Which of these paintings, I'll go ahead and take this off here, my stop share. Which of those paintings do you think is more accurate of leadership of you as you've experienced it? Is it?
I would say the second one, definitely. Second one for me.
And why?
Well, it looks to be, I don't know if the French Revolution, was it a civil war? Because it looks absolutely chaotic to me. That paint.
Yes.
And a lot of times my church is a chaotic mess too. So.
Yeah, there's something about that painting that speaks to the messiness of leadership that I really resonate with. Who else? Which one? Yes.
Yeah, I would just say my experience has sort of been the opposite, in that our church has experienced a long period of evenness, I guess, with one leader that was very steady and everything was sort of calm, and that ingrained sort of a lethargy in the followers, if you will.
Okay.
And so I feel like it's caused a little bit of people don't know how to move forward without that central leader showing them the way.
Great.
And there's no the idea of the people coming forward and taking control and seeking a goal, as assuming leadership themselves, is a little foreign here.
Okay. All right. Great. what else can we take from that?
I guess
That's exactly.
I would support what Roger says. I think that often the leader would look to the second figure as what you want to have is people taking ownership and participant, and the first one with the prominent leader guiding things is often what the people are looking to the leader for. So there's often, in my experience, a little bit of conflict there.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Sometimes
Oh,
what people want isn't necessarily what needs what the context needs, right? Uh,
the calling to action by the Spirit, I think, is the goal. But oftentimes, I'm from a long time uh, pastored church, and the uh, the leader guiding people is more prominent than being led by the Spirit. And so, thank
mhm.
you, Roger, for giving words to what I'm experiencing.
So I started with these two paintings because I think it juxtaposes different views of leadership well and our own experience. Is leadership messy? Yes. Are followers important? Yes. Is the leader important? Absolutely. The goal is also important. But what is interesting is that both of these are revolutionary contexts, but the leadership is very different. So I start with this to start with a definition of leadership. And so I argue with my co-author, Gama Perucci, that leadership is a process. And I highlighted that word just to focus on the difference between leadership being a process versus a person. So it's a process by which leaders and followers develop a relationship and work together towards a goal within a context that's shaped by cultural values and norms. And we saw that even in the former paintings, right? So there was a physical leader with Washington. There were the followers. They were moving all of the ice out on the Delaware River. There was the goal of freedom represented by the flag. The context was very different, though, than the French Revolution, where you didn't have as much of a physical leader as much as you had the ideal, right? The ideal was the goal. And you had followers taking a much more active role in that process. So you still had a leader and a follower and a goal, but the context was very different and was much messier because perhaps you didn't have as much of a physical leader. And then you've got cultural values and norms. I think that just like the revolution in the United States, it certainly was not a bloodless revolution, but it played out very differently than it did in France. And part of that is the cultural values and norms. Just like leadership in your churches is probably going to play out differently depending upon the culture of your church, right? So we're going to address each of these concepts in our time today. This is a little graphic that I have for us that just kind of illustrates this process of leadership being this relationship between leaders and followers, and that goes both ways. And they're achieving a goal within a context that's influenced by those cultural values and norms. So let me stop my share so we can talk a little bit. Look back at your picture now that you originally drew, and how do you think about leadership maybe differently after having this conversation? What would you add to your picture? What might you take away from your picture? Go ahead and just, take maybe 30 seconds to doodle. And what's different now? I see people are still doodling, so I won't call time. Take about 10 more seconds. Okay, who's first? What did you add? What did you take away?
I-
Yeah.
My original picture was of a servant leader, sort of like washing the feet of a the follower, if you will. But that was all it was. It was really about that relationship, if you will. And so I added the goal because I didn't really
Okay.
have the goal represented in my original picture. So
It's really interesting because we're going to talk a little bit about that today, Roger. I think that you actually got servant leadership, though. Servant leadership is not about the goal. The person is the goal. The follower is the goal. That's also a criticism of servant leadership that sometimes it doesn't, it's so follower centric, then sometimes it doesn't get to the goal. Yeah. So great. Who else? What did you add? What did you take away? Yeah, Christine.
My original picture was an upside down triangle with leadership on the bottom, and then kind of planning and empowering toward the top.
Yep.
And now my picture has changed to make that more square, to realize that the leadership while you're doing those things as you move up, and it is still base, it maybe needs to be strong regardless, as that stronger instead of a tiny little triangle point.
Yeah. So that, and you'll even see in the PowerPoint later on today, that is kind of the quintessential example of servant leader, where you have an upside down triangle and the leader's on the bottom and the followers are on the top. I also point out, though, that that puts a tremendous amount of pressure on the leader. That and maybe it doesn't take into account all of the other things that may be a part of it, the goal
Right.
context, right? So excellent. Jose, I see you shaking your head. How did you change your picture?
Well, I had people moving together, but I didn't have a goal. And so, and I like the idea of the ideal, of the spiritual, because when the leader's gone, it's the spirit of their leadership that will continue to guide in absence of the next leader. And just moving together is not necessarily good because you could be moving in the wrong direction. Uh, and so moving towards the goal was the thing that I needed in my imaging of leadership.
Yeah, that the goal really is the crux of leadership. Leadership is about purposeful interaction. We came today in order to learn something about leadership to ultimately apply to our churches, right? We didn't just come together to have coffee. Um, Although that could be a goal in certain circumstances, to have coffee and develop fellowship. But this idea of purposeful interaction really is the crux of leadership. Lori, what did you change about your picture?
I'm feeling a chorus here because I did add a goal, and then my original picture had people holding hands. And I had someone in the lead with that, but I hadn't clearly identified them with what you would see in an established leader. So someone's experience or things that put them in the leadership position. So added a few very simple sketches to say, hey, this might designate that person as a leader, and also gave them a goal.
Great. So what we're going to do now is, we've talked about the idea of leadership as a process, and we've kind of expanded our vision. When I talk to my undergrads and I ask them to draw a picture of leadership, I think that you'll see this. Well, they often draw, and I'm not, and this is just what they draw. They draw a picture, an S, like a Superman, right? Or they'll draw a picture of someone standing on a mountain with their hands up, right? And a lot of people just kind of like applauding. And um, I think, look, it's where they are. It's a place to start. But when they start thinking about these other aspects of leadership, it starts to really um, open up that process of leadership a lot more. And so what we're going to do today is we'll talk about each one of these. So we'll talk about the leader. I'll give you some tools around developing the leader. I'm also going to talk about the follower and really empowering the follower. And I think about the people in your congregation, about how that may help. And then we're going to spend some time on the context of your congregations. What's the culture? And how do you ultimately achieve the goal with yourself as the leader, with your congregation in this particular context? What is the goal? So that's where we're really going with the rest of our time today. So we happen to be at 9:55. I promised a break every hour. So let's go ahead and just take a 5-minute bio break. We'll come back at 10 and we'll jump into some tools to develop our leadership. Sound good? I'll see you in 5 minutes. Welcome back, everybody. I had to go get myself a cup of tea, a warm up. I hope you were able to do that as well. We had a lot of snow last night. We probably got about, I live down in Marietta, 4 or 5 inches out there. I don't know if you have as much where you are. I was going to see my mom in Chicago this weekend, and she actually said, Robert, don't come. It's going to be a mess. So I canceled my flight. I'll reschedule the trip. Yeah, my dad was at this little church outside Chicago for 50 years. It was really quite a life growing up in that church and being that, it was just so much part of my family's life for so long. He preached his last sermon when he was 85, and then the next day he had a stroke.
Wow.
And spent the next 2 years kind of recovering from that before he passed away. But I asked him one time, do you have any regrets? He said, none. I did what I wanted to do. So I think that that's pretty neat.
Wonderful.
Okay, so let me go ahead and share my screen again. So we ended with this idea that leadership is a process. Now we're going to talk about some different styles of leadership. And I want to help you articulate your style of leadership, give you some tools. This portion of the seminar really is about developing your leadership and where you are and maybe where you want to be. And I've got 2 basic styles of leadership here, a directive style where the leader really drives the process, and a more facilitative style where the leader, I'm going to say, more enables the followers to drive the process. Let me also start with just a word here. We're going to talk a lot about followers. I know that word has a lot of negative connotations, and we're going to talk about those today, specifically when we look at the concept of followership. And there's a great deal of really wonderful literature around that concept. I hear something. Is there maybe a mic on? There we go. Okay, so these are 2, I'm going to say them, basic styles of leadership, a directive style and a facilitative style. Followers are an integral part of the leadership process. And by followers, I do not mean that people are in lesser than the leader, but rather they have less authority, power, and influence in a particular situation than the leader, but it doesn't mean that they don't have any. So if you were to look at these 2 basic styles, which do you think at this point let me give you 2 questions. Which is one that you're more comfortable with? And which do you think your church needs? So which style are you more comfortable with? And which do you think your church needs?
I think that, how do I say it? I don't think you can stick with any one type. I think if you're new going into a church, that you probably I would almost always assume the directive style. But the church that with the leadership style I'm more comfortable with is the facilitative style. But I think you have to shift focus, as I mean, leadership in a church, my secular employment was also in leadership. I was vice president of human resources and, you know, before I became a pastor. And there are times you have to have the directive, but I think that the most comfortable place for me is facilitated. But I think that you have to start someplace to make that assessment.
Christine, thank you so much for that, because I think that really brings into the role of context, right?
Mhm.
And what we find is that people do have, I'm going to say, a comfort zone, right? Some people are much more comfortable with that directive style, but they may be in a situation where they need to switch to that more facilitative style because that's what's being called for. Other people enjoy a more facilitative style, but they have to switch when a more directive style is called for. So I think that that's, we all have our comfort zones, but there is necessity in the ability to switch. When the house is on fire, you don't call a committee, right? So good. What the research does show us is that people probably, it's a little harder for them to switch than they think it is, right? So there has to be a very conscious switch depending on the context. So again, what are you comfortable with, and what do you think your church needs? And you can even focus around a particular goal, right? So like when my dad was at his church in the 1970s, he had inherited this church. It was donated from a man who bought the land in a revival in the 1900s. And the church was 100 years old, and it was very, very tiny, and they needed to do a remodel. And so, but they wanted to still keep they didn't want to completely redo the church, right? It was a historical landmark in that particular town outside of Chicago. So he took a very directive approach in leading that project. Over time, though, I think that the church needed a much more facilitative approach in order to grow. So again, what's your comfort? What does your church need?
I think I just observed too, as Presbyterians, we have kind of a facilitator style built into our very structure of rule by elders. And I see that our structure, or our people, look longingly at the independents around us who have a very directive style, who seem to be doing quite well at this point, membership wise and growth wise. And so I think across different churches, you see those different styles, and kind of makes you wonder at times.
So Bob, may I probe that a little bit?
Sure, sure.
I'm going to go ahead and stop the share because I think you got the idea of the slide. So yes. So the Presbyterian Church is certainly set up in a more facilitative style. And yet when you do see the larger church context around you, it is much more, I'm going to say, pastor driven. Very, very much of in some cases, almost, I would call it a cult of personality.
Absolutely.
So my question then for that is, what do you want to do with that? And it's not a leading question in any way. I mean, is that leadership style so foundation to the Presbyterian Church that to change to this more directive style, would that be antithetical to the Presbyterians' values? Is there room for taking a more directive leadership style in order to accomplish the goal, if that's what needs to be done, of building churches? It's an honest question. What do you think?
I think it's an honest question we don't have the answer to. Uh, we have seen, I live in Columbus essentially and drive 12 miles up to West Berlin. I go by 4 new church starts on my way coming up here, and they're all in the very directive leadership style. So when I get to my little flock here, which is an average sized Presbyterian church with 58 members, the potential is very different. And then what do I, how do I handle that when they look at aspirations and then look what we can do and what we look at our neighbors that are happening around us? It creates envy, if nothing else, but it does point out a leadership difference in style. And then does that constrain us beyond what's rational at this point?
So how would it change? How would it change the culture of the church if you said, okay, we're going to go with a more directional leadership style, and this is what we're going to do? Would that change be successful? To what extent?
I think personally, I feel like we're sort of stuck in this exact spot, and I do feel like it's a lot about you said the cult of personality, or the personality of the leader, who get people to come on board with the vision, if you will. But it's a very sensitive thing, because I think somehow the vision has to be first. The followers have to buy in to the vision, and then they will allow the leader to lead them. But if a leader tries to take the followers toward a vision that they have not bought into, it's going to be a train wreck. And somehow that you got to get on parallel tracks or something. And that's what I'm trying to do here, to sort of prepare the soil at our church, because I think our next call is a very critical thing for the life of our church going forward. We're healthy now, but there are a lot of signs of disease happening. And if we don't turn it around, we're going to go the way of a lot of mainline churches. And but the vision's got to be embedded amongst the followers, or else a strong leader is just going to fizzle.
So I just have to ask you, if you were to articulate that vision in one sentence, what's the vision?
For me, the vision is witnessing and spreading the gospel of Jesus Christ. But I don't think, honestly, that's the vision of most of our followers in our church. And I think I'm trying to do some things to get us there. That's my personal feeling. And I think that is what those churches that we were talking about that are successful, that is their focus. And that, for some reason, has not become our focus. And somehow we got to change that. So I'll stop talking.
No, I think that you've really pointed out, going back to like the Washington Cross and the Delaware, the metaphor of everyone rowing in the same direction, everyone, moving towards the same vision. When we talk about achieving the goal, this is a big part of it. What is the goal?
We don't have one now.
Okay, so that's part of that process of leadership, right? Is you may have to decide what is our goal. I know that Christine, you had your hand up, and Jose, it seemed like you were really resonating with some of what Roger was saying. So Christine and then Jose.
I in thinking about what Bob, is talking about, and boy, we see it. We do see that, and the whole charismatic personalities with the strong leadership, and what happens in our bigger churches. But interestingly enough, when our churches get to a certain smallness, for lack of a better word, our smallest churches are where I have pretty much always served, except when I was at Fredericktown, and it was about 50 people, though there were times they thought they had 170, whatever. But what I'm experiencing now with going to this new church in March in the other presbytery is I'm seeing where that requires a directive style only till you get there. They need facilitative because they have gotten very independent. They're independent thinkers. They've got elders who are willing to go up and do a sermon on a Sunday. They don't require a full-time pastor. They can't afford a full-time pastor. And some of this happens, when they run out of money. The church is getting smaller, smaller, smaller. And the need to empower them further, I think, in our small churches is going to be a requirement as pastors to do that and help prepare them for the time. Because as cost goes up and difficulty with finding full-time ministry goes up financially for churches that can no longer afford it, the church leadership that's in place, the elders, need to pick up and do more.
So I
They're
hear
going
you
to have
saying that you need to take a more directive style in this context, and part of it is telling the followers what they need to do to survive.
Mhm.
Okay.
And of course that's partly transitional training, but in the beauty of it is that this church is ready for that facilitative type. They're
And that's
ready.
always part of it too. Some are ready and some are not, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Jose, what are your thoughts?
I was just nodding my head for what Bob and Roger were saying because um, from the amen corner, because
Okay.
going through that and experiencing that church envy, that ministry envy, without necessarily being prepared, uh, training wise or time wise to make the investments to make that happen. That those churches aren't uh, proselytizing by themselves. It's the members that are going out and sharing and are inviting. Uh, and so the same thing happens in Presbyterian churches also when you share and invite. In fact, that's all we're called to do. God does the rest. And a lot of times we forget that.
Okay. So let me pop back over to here. And we've talked a little bit about these different styles of leadership, what you have maybe a comfort with, what your congregation or your church needs. Let me pop to a new slide here. This is a power continuum, and it relates to different approaches to leadership. Very leader-centric, the primacy of the individual. I'm going to say that Washington crossing the Delaware, right? Washington's really the main focus. Of course, the followers have to be there to do that work, but the focus is the leader to much more this collectivist approach, the primacy of the group. You've got rich, poor, male, female, old, young, all in the Delacroix painting, right? You can see different approaches to leadership on this continuum, right? So when you talk about some of your churches in your area that are more leader centric or very personality centric, one of the traits that those ministers of those churches often have is charisma, right? There is this, I'm kind of showing my cards here because I have a real suspicion of charismatic personality. And I also know that that is what people look for in a leader, whether I like it or not. But it's very leader approach, very traits approach, right? And then you have more of this style approach that tries to balance, I'm going to say, the primacy of the leader and the direction with the importance and care and nurturing of the followers. We'll go into each of these. And then a little bit more towards this collective, we have a transformational approach, which certainly looks at the leader, but it also looks at the followers and how they're in relationship together. And then finally, the servant leadership approach, which we are all a part of, and kind of understand, at least in theory, from our I want to say our faith backgrounds. I'm going to look at each of these, and I think of them as tools. What tools do you have that you can use? What tools do you need to nurture, given the context that you're in? So let's start with leadership traits, right? So here are a list of traits that people often associate with leadership. Are they authentic, charismatic, emotionally intelligent, what have you? If you had to list one trait that you have that's very positive for your leadership in your church, what would it be? That's the first question. The second question is, what trait do you need to nurture in order to be more effective in your church? So what do you have? What would you like to nurture? And the third question is, what could you do to start nurturing that trait? So 3 questions. What trait do you have that you think really helps propel your leadership? What trait do you need to nurture in order to be more effective in your church? And what's one thing you can do to help nurture that less developed trait? Does anyone want to start on this one?
I can start.
Okay, Tom.
As far as the thing that I think that I'm bringing to the table after being there a few years, I think that is being innovative because the church has been there for an awfully long time, and I thought it was time maybe to try some different ideas. Luckily, the session was ready for some innovative ideas, or they wouldn't have supported me as much as they have. But the one thing that I think I need to nurture is being more persuasive
Mm.
Um, and I guess a way to do that would be to review the results that have come out of being innovative, and try to stress where we've come from, where we've been. And the one thing that we developed early on when I became pastor was making sure we all had the same goal, and we are all focused on that goal of being the best Matthew 25 outreach church in the neighborhood. And so that's our goal, to remain relative for the neighborhood and keep developing programs that will bring us in front of our people. So but there again, I think it would be helpful for me to learn how to be a little more persuasive.
So what could you do to, let's say, stretch that muscle a little bit, that more persuasive muscle?
Well, I have to be, at least I haven't been as maybe firm and direct as I need to be sometimes. So I could be maybe a little more forceful in some of the things that I think the church needs to look at. But those things I've just put them down a priority list, but I think we need to revisit them so um, we can become more effective.
Okay, so that's your next goal, right? Is to bring the church's attention to this priority list. Perfect. Wonderful. Someone else, what's a trait that you have that's working really well for you? What would you like to develop, and what can you do to develop that? Lori, may I ask you? I just haven't heard from you for a while, so I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I want to invite you to speak if you'd like to.
Not at all. I am a person who is very results oriented. And for better or worse, I think I can be fairly charismatic in a group, so I can have people persuaded to join me in that quest for the results. I think that has to be balanced with a high level of emotional intelligence. And I think that's an opportunity to make sure that I'm very sensitive to that, and developing that more facilitative leadership, and making sure that, because that's a critical part, I think, especially in the church setting, of making sure that we're all doing this together, and it's not, you know,
So what could you do to develop that trait of emotional intelligence?
the thing that I think that I find myself most drawn to doing is spending more time in prayer.
Ah,
Especially in the context that we're talking about here, and making sure that the approach that I'm taking is very prayerfully considered, and that the goal is not my will, but thy will.
beautiful.
Listen more than I talk.
Okay, beautiful, beautiful said. One more. What's a trait you have that's working? What do you need to develop, and how can you develop it? Gidget, may I call on you? I haven't heard from you for a little bit.
Well, I think I'm authentic. I mean, I am the person that they come to, and I will be authentic. And honestly, before Tom was talking, I thought what I needed to work on was to be more innovative and come up with ideas. And then when I listened to Tom, I thought, oh, well, I guess I have come up with ideas and everybody follows along with it. But I still think that is still a place for improvement, definitely. And I get those kind of improvements and ideas by sharing with other people, a cohort group that I'm in, being here with y'all today. I just think that helps.
Beautiful. So you kind of got a plan for, continuing to develop that. Okay, lovely. Let me move on to this next one here. So the last one was very leader-centric, right? What can you do? This is more of a behavioral or style approach to leadership. Many of you may have been introduced to this. This is by Blake and Mooten. It's an easy grid. It looks a little overwhelming at first, but basically you have an X and Y axis, a concern for people, high to low, versus a concern for production, high to low. So, someone who's only worried about production and not worried about people at all is going to be down in this quadrant, right? Someone who is extremely worried about, are people happy? Are they having a good time? But they're not necessarily getting what the goal accomplished, they're up here. Um, and then of course, team would be both of these. And then you'd have middle of the road. Now, what research has told us is that depending upon the context, you would think, okay, I always need to be a 9-9. Not necessarily. It really depends on the context that you're working in and what is called for. But what people do usually have is, I'm going to say, a comfort zone, right? Where they might be in one of these areas. You would think, well, 5-5 is pretty, well, that's a good happy medium. Well, maybe it is, or maybe it's not. It also means that people are just only moderately happy and you're not quite reaching the goal, right? So where would you put yourself on this continuum, again, as far as your comfort level? And then I want you to think about a specific goal that you have in your church. What does your style of leadership need to be? Right? So my comfort level is, I want to say I'm much more relationally driven. I am more results driven. So I would probably be like maybe a 7 or 7 is where I'd like to be in this new role that I've had to take on at my university. I've had to come much more down to a we need to get some stuff done. And that hasn't always meant that people are happy, but that's what we needed to do, right? So that was a real stretch for me. Where's your comfort zone? What goal do you have that needs a stretch? Christine?
Okay, again, you using the church that I'm going to be serving, uh, and primarily small churches. I think sometimes it's easy to slip into the impoverished management area,
Mm,
um, where people just kind of throw up their hands and say, what are we, you know, nobody follows through because nobody really believes that the goal can be accomplished, I think.
okay.
Um, where I would put my need in this church is probably like you said, about a 7 up in this team management kind of thing in there, because that empowering them to continue to sort of develop their strengths and not hold them back, and over the years, I my secular work was all work till I did payroll for like 38 years. And I was the one person who could do it. And if it didn't get done, nobody would be happy if they didn't get a paycheck, you know. So kind of moving into the team management area has not been easy for me.
Ah,
But I do,
because you're
but I
much
do
more,
know,
mhm.
yeah, because I've that the directional, if you're a single person role with nobody else knows how to do the job, I think you just naturally become that. So working into this whole team management is the thing that I'm looking forward uh, instead of that impoverished, this is a group who says, we have goals. We want to achieve these goals.
So
We
what's
need
one
help
goal?
achieving.
What's
That,
one goal?
that one goal of, I mean, is simply to build their church up.
Numbers.
Uh, that to have more people, be able to do more missional work, and that is what we're going to have to work on is mission in the community.
Okay. So you've got
Mission
your
out.
mission outreach, and you know
Yes.
that you have people, there's a concern for people there that are part of this. So
Mhm.
you might have to flex a little bit from being more directive to
Right.
bringing more people into that decision-making process and how you achieve that goal.
Right.
Beautifully. Beautiful. Roger, where are you? What's one goal where you need to be
Yeah.
with your church?
Well, honestly, I would say we're at the country club management right now. People are comfortable and want to be comfortable. And unfortunately, I'm comfortable for them. I've had many people approach me in this role, and say, why don't you just stay? Why can't you just stay and be our pastor? And I keep saying, I'm not what we need because we don't, we need to be moving over, right now honestly, I feel like we're a little bit goal-less.
Okay.
We don't have a vision and don't have a goal. And I've got a couple sessions scheduled here, one coming up this Saturday and another one in a month with the congregation to do some visioning and goal setting for the congregation. So we've got some specific events planned to try to bring the congregation around to setting one or two, maybe three specific goals for how we want to move forward as a congregation. So, because we don't really have that now.
Okay, so you need to help them focus on their concern for production.
Right.
And one of those things is calling a new pastor.
Right.
So you might have to, this is very nice to be, but you might have to drop a little bit about in your concern for people in order to move higher in your concern for production.
Right. Absolutely. No, I feel it. And that's hard for me because I'm a people pleaser. So it's a difficult spot. So I have to work at that.
And, and that's part of that process. Knowing that it is the first step in being able to do that, but it will never, we all have these comforts, right?
Right.
It will take a discomfort for you to be able to get there. It's just part of that process. One more. Where are you in your church? Where do you need to be for a specific goal?
I am going to jump in there because what you just said, it will take a discomfort to get you out of where you are. And the church that I went to, I mean, right away, I loved everybody, but I was a people pleaser. And I went in, I want us all to love each other and we'll keep going. And what I did not know until a year and a half in was the CRE before me, he had decided on his own to call in this other person who used to be a minister of word and sacrament, but was stripped of that because he had been 3 counts of sexual misconduct on him. And he had called him into the church to help do things. So somebody died and the family wanted this person who was no longer minister of word and sacrament. And this came down like the entire ceiling had fallen on me. And he called me and kind of threatened me. They loved me there. You need to let me do the funeral. And it was at that point, my concern for people dropped way down because I thought, you are not going to do this to me. And Presbytery came in and helped, and they were, backing me. and 2 people on session left the church because they adored him. He was charismatic, and none of them knew that he had been accused and then found guilty of 3 counts of sexual misconduct. And then when I kind of laid it down to everybody and said, we are going to have transparency, we are going to trust each other, and you are not going to do that to me again. And then it was like, oh, okay. And we kind of started over from that point. But I realized really quick, there are times where I guess I'm not as much people person as I thought when we need to follow book of order.
So that's what the context called for, right? And you have to, a good leader has to learn to adapt to that context. And that's the concept of leadership as a process. So, okay, excellent. Let me show you 2 more on the power continuum, if you will. Now, this is more transformational leadership. This is much more, I'm going to say, kind of middle between the primacy of the individual leader and the primacy of the group. You do see what I'm going to call a charismatic aspects here: idealized influence, inspirational motivation. On the other hand, you do see very follower-focused concepts such as individual consideration and intellectual stimulation. These are the 4 I's, if you will. What's interesting about transformational leadership is that there's probably more written on transformational leadership than any other form of leadership. It was originally the person who articulated it was James McGregor Burns, and he called transforming leadership as a process where both the leader and the follower are both transformed into higher levels of motivation and ethics, right? So it's not just the followers who are being transformed, the leader themselves are also being transformed in that process. And there's this mutual reciprocity. I'm not going to go into that as much because for lack of time, I want to make sure that we have time to go to all of these today. And I've just got one more to show you. But I wanted to show you kind of this continuum of where people are. And then there's this very well-known one of servant leadership. And you've already articulated that. That kind of looks like the leader on the bottom serving the followers. The problem with that is that the concern for production really isn't there. The leader, it might be a byproduct. It might happen. And Greenleaf said it would happen. But the focus is just the development of the follower. So kind of seeing these 4 different aspects now, where would you put yourself on the continuum? Obviously, there's places that you need to move back and forth, but primacy of the individual or the primacy of the group? Tom, where would you put yourself?
I'd have to say that the primacy of the group is the most important thing for our church, because without it, we're not going to survive.
Okay.
So I was hoping that I would be more on the transformational leadership end of things, so going to the servant leadership with the primacy of the group, of course, as the collectivism that.
So this is where, and are you comfortable there?
I am. I'm very much so.
Good. Roger, where would you put yourself?
Probably on the servant leadership side right now.
Way over here.
Trying to get to the transformational area.
Okay. More of that idea of, yes, the leader is important, and there is this idealized influence, but also this very personal connection with the followers and their intellectual stimulation to help them grow.
Correct.
Is that working for you?
Sometimes I feel like it is, and sometimes I feel like it isn't. So It's yeah. I think we're making some progress. Let's put it that way. Yeah. I think people are coming along. Is it as fast and as energetic as I would want? I haven't quite seen that, but I'm hoping we're getting some traction here. So
All right.
I think with
Yes.
the that the goals or the vision is important. That um, I would tend to fall somewhere between transformational and servant leader, uh, but we lack um, a vision. We've got an identity crisis at the church because uh, who do we want? You know, the goal is to get more people to fill the pews, uh, but then there's all these specifiers on what kind of people, how they act, but what they do and what they don't do, and it's um, the goal should be that they participate in the ministry as in recipients, but also as givers. And so there's something that followers do uh, as part of the group. And it's not just about them feeling good. It's not only about them feeling good. It's about them doing good also. So there's a balance to the continuum. I would probably put uh, uh, a wedge there in the middle so that the line can balance uh, because you want a horizontal line, but circumstances will have it tend towards the we or towards the individual. And then the leader's role is to make sure that all the followers are equipped to meet the needs of the context, but then also um, are fed with what they need. And so, um, in my context right now, I think we need to look at those individual traits and how they fit into this overall vision, so that we can balance that continuum.
And Jose, you really emphasized, I think that what I was trying to do with this little piece of our conversation today is the idea of balance, right? And depending upon your context, depending upon your goal, you may have to use these approaches as tools. What is needed in this context? I really need to be focused completely on just serving this person. Or you might say, we really need to be directive and get this done. Or I really need to balance my behavior. Or how am I changing as well, right? So these are just it's a way of looking at it, that leadership is not a either or, it is a continuum of behaviors, of approaches, and I just offer these to you today as a way of thinking about your leadership and what it needs in any particular situation. So we've talked a little bit about, let's see how we're doing on time up here. So it's about 10:49. I am actually going to transition to the concept of followership. So even though it's a little early for a break, I think this would be a really nice time to take a break, again, get a cup of coffee, come back in 5 minutes, and then we're really going to focus on the follower. We focused on the leader, then we'll focus on the follower, and then we'll focus on the goal. So go ahead and take 5 minute break if you would, and we'll come back and I've got some things to show you around followership, which I think you'll find really interesting. Thank you.
Robert, let me just mention that I'm going to have to exit at 11:30. I
No
apologize
worries.
for that, but I've got a meeting that I'm hosting that I've got to get set up for too.
I completely understand. No worries at all.
Please don't take any offense at that. I just got to leave it.
Got it. No offense taken, promise. Welcome back, Tom. Hello, Lori. Christine. Roger. Give everyone a minute to join us here. All right, welcome back. Okay, I know that Jose is still out, but I'm going to go ahead and start so we can, make sure that we have our time here. So we're going to talk a little bit now about followership. We've talked about leadership as a process. We've talked about developing the leader and talked a little bit about our strengths and areas for improvement and what our contexts are calling for. I want to introduce you now to this concept of followership. This is a concept that is newer to the field of leadership research. I would say it's really blossomed in the last 10 years. And I've got a video to show you, as well as some other things that I think you'll find really interesting. But I want to start with a painting again. So if you'll let me share my screen. I like art, so I use a lot of paintings, forgive me. So let me go ahead and share here. So when you see this painting here, I want you to just kind of take it all in. This is, I believe, the Scottish Guard. And I don't have the artist's name right here in front of me, although I'd be happy to get it for you. But what do you see? Just tell me what you see. Christine, are you speaking? I think you're on mute. Bob? Jose?
The leader in front of the uh, leading the followers.
Okay, excellent. So kind of like liberty leading the people, you see this very prominent leader calling back to the followers in this charge. I'm going to ask you to use your imagination for a moment. What if all of these other pieces, what if the followers were not there? How would that change your view of the painting?
I think rather than seeing the leader as someone who's probably saying charge, he would be saying, where in the heck are you guys?
Okay, kind of on his own. Good.
Well,
What would
without followers, they wouldn't have a leader.
that's in order to yeah, in order to have a leader, in order to be a leader, you need at least one follower, right? Um, I'd also ask though, what would happen if this figure was erased from the painting and you only had this group without this character? What would you then think of the painting?
Then I think you just have a stampede of horses.
Yes, you'd have a stampede. It'd be chaos, right? So this really brings into focus the importance of the relationship between leaders and followers. In the last 10, 20 years in leadership studies, there's been a lot of focus on the follower. And I'd like to take some of the sting out of the term follower. I think that we all think of follower as someone who's passive, who's unthinking, kind of a lemming, right? That is not the way we're using it. The definition of a follower is simply a subordinate in a particular context who has less authority and power and influence, but they're still engaged in the relationship with the leader and that goal. So I think about the most recent presidential election. You know, half the country voted for one person, half the country voted for the other. That does not mean, so if I did not vote for Donald Trump, it does not mean that I am not a citizen of the United States. And in that particular construct, in that context, the president has more authority, power, and influence than I do as a follower, but I'm still a subordinate in that context. Now, it does not mean that I don't have any authority, power, and influence, right? But it is less than. And I think that in the field of leadership studies, most recently, we're really been thinking about the power that followers really do have in order to get goals accomplished. So I want to actually play this little video for you. This is by Iris Shaliff's Foundation for Followership. And the woman who is leading this, she actually does these videos specifically on using tango as a metaphor for the importance of followers. And as we watch this little video, I'm going to ask you to be thinking about the different followers that she's describing in this video and how they relate to individual members of your church. And then ultimately, we're going to say, how do we help followers become more effective in achieving the goal, in using their critical thinking? But I'm going to start with this in order to just kind of whet our appetites and our minds around this idea of followership. Let me stop my share for a second, bring up this. Okay. Let me go back and share my screen. Can you all see and hear that?
Can't hear
No,
the audio.
you can't?
Yeah,
Mm.
you can see it, but no audio.
Sometimes that happens. Let me just do something here.
Hey, Robert,
Yeah.
I think I think there's something on the share screen when you go to share that says to share computer audio.
Oh, thank you. See, that's why we need the guy in the chair.
Yeah. Well, wait, don't congratulate me yet. I just know that works with Teams. Like sometimes there's when you go to share, sometimes there's
Share sound.
yeah.
Okay.
I'm just double checking here.
Okay, let's try this again. Got it? Thank goodness for the guy in the chair. Let me just start it over. Okay.
name is Sharna, and this is my partner Isaac. We're going to talk to you today a little bit about the leading and following roles in tango, with a special focus on the follower role. Before we start, I'd like to say that the terms leader and follower are gender neutral. That means that either men or women could dance as leaders and followers. We're going to show the same tango sequence a few times. The first time, we'll be demonstrating what we consider to be graceful following. Notice how we're both engaged and we're both paying close attention to one another so that we can improvise and harmoniously move together to the music. So now we're going to do the same sequence again, but we're going to demonstrate what we would consider to be weak following. Sometimes there's a misconception that the follower is passive and does not take responsibility for her own movements. In good dancing, actually, the opposite is true. But for the purpose of this demonstration, I'm going to be completely passive and ask Isaac to do all the work. So Isaac, what was it like when I was being the weak follower?
It really felt restrictive. It really felt heavy, like I had to drag you around the dance floor.
And would you compare that to what we did the first time?
The first time it really felt like things were much more creative. It allowed more expression in the dance as opposed to being really cut off from any creative experience.
Next, we'd like to show you an example of self-serving following. This follower is sometimes called a show-off because she's more interested in her own steps than in co-creating the dance with her partner. So Isaac, what was it like when I was being the showing off follower?
It really felt like there wasn't really any point for me to be there as a leader. It really felt like you were dancing by yourself and that I was just kind of standing there watching it happen.
So you wouldn't have wanted to do this again?
No. If in this particular case, if you wanted to dance like that, I would be very happy to sit down and watch you dance as opposed to stand there and watch you dance.
This time when we show the sequence, we're going to demonstrate a follower who is fighting against her leader. You'll notice that this follower does not respect the vision of the leader and actually changes the course of the dance. So Isaac, what was that like when I was fighting you?
It was a little surprising. You're pretty strong.
Really?
Yeah.
How strong?
Very strong. I'd put
And
you
how
on
did it
like
make you feel?
pretty bad, kind of weak actually. Like I needed to go to the gym.
Would you like to do that again?
Never.
Why not?
Because it wasn't really fun. There was no.
What's not fun about it?
I like to lead. I like to be the leader.
Why do you have to lead all the time?
Not all the time. Just whenever we're dancing. That's it.
Oh, whenever we're dancing?
Yes.
So on the dance floor you have to be the leader?
Yes.
And why?
Because it's the only 3 minutes I get.
Now let's look at a different tango sequence, in which the leader might sometimes lose focus or balance. When this happens, a strong follower can, from her grounded position, help to stabilize him and keep the dance moving along in a fluid way, rather than letting it fall apart. We We hope this brief demonstration has given you some useful metaphors for following in non-dance situations. I've always been fascinated by how the approach of the follower can influence the creative potential of the leader. In tango, the follower-leader relationship is always complementary and never hierarchical. It's a conversation in which we help each other make our own unique contributions to the dance.
Okay, let me stop that for a second. Great. So, what you see there? Tell me a little bit about how you can apply that metaphor to your congregations. What types of followers do you have? How's the dance?
I think we have people that are sitting watching dance. And we need to get people to accept a position as a dancer in the grand scheme of things. That's where I think we're at right now.
So they're not on the dance floor.
Exactly.
We need to bring them to the dance floor, empower them, encourage them to take ownership of that dance. Good.
Yes.
What else?
I have people on the dance floor and they're enjoying themselves. We just all sort of need to work together. But I'm going to put a plug in. I love Dancing with the Stars. So you had me at dance.
Okay. She actually, Sharna actually goes to conferences and teaches people tango in regards to followership. And it's fascinating to be a part of that very physical process, right? So yeah. So where are the followers in your church? Are they on the dance floor? Are they helping to support the leader in the dance? Are they kind of doing their own thing? What is it like?
They are on the dance floor and they're supporting the leader. And sometimes they're taking the lead as well. So
Okay,
it has taken a while to get there, but yeah.
excellent. Other congregations, where are they? Yes.
I believe that this congregation I'm going to would be follow into this whole stabilizing follower, where they kind of pick up to keep things going and going smoothly, and are willing to do that. They're definitely on the dance floor, and they complement the leadership. I was impressed when I spoke with them, and they asked me what I needed to be
Ah,
able to work with them in their, this time that's critical for them. So, they were concerned about my situation too, not overly, not in that kind of needy, you've got a needy pastor kind of way, but enough that that I saw them in this stabilizing
kind of
follower.
stabilizing the dance to make
Yeah,
sure
where
that
they
it
pick up
flows.
to keep things going on track and whatever.
Good. So we've got people not on the dance floor dancing well. We've got them stabilizing the dance. What else? One more. What do we have for that metaphor?
I think I've got a group of people that used to dance real well, but they don't have the capacity to dance in that way anymore. And they're
Okay.
trying to figure out what the new tango looks like when you're not 30 and mobile and
Right.
moving well.
So maybe how do we bring new people to that dance?
Well, even if you don't bring new people, how do you adjust the dance for the people you have?
Okay. Or how to adjust the dance for I'd love that metaphor. Okay. So we've started to talk a little bit about the importance of the follower in the leadership process. I want to go back to sharing this. This is another approach to understanding the followers. And it's one of the first, and it basically puts followers on an axis of independent critical thinking, dependent uncritical thinking, active in achieving the goal, or passive in achieving the goal. So exemplary followers are going to be very high in their critical thinking, and they're going to need to be very active in achieving their goal. They're going to be helping to dance, right? You have others that are kind of yes people. They're dependent, uncritical thinking, but they are active in achieving the goal, right? So whatever the leader says, if they take a very directive approach, they're going to do it. Then you have dependent, uncritical thinking, very passive in achieving the goal. These would be more of what we typically think of the term follower as sheep, right? Just kind of moving along as much as you tell them. And then there are alienated followers that they're very capable, but for whatever reason, they have been disengaged from the organization, and so they are no longer active in achieving the goal. And then you've got the pragmatists or the survivors who kind of jump around depending upon, what's going to best serve them at the time. So let me ask you this. Let me ask about this one. So my bet is you all have some followers who they certainly have the capability, but they're passive in achieving the goal for whatever reason. What might you do to be able to move them from here to here? From alienated more into the exemplary role.
The emotional intelligence plays a lot in this to listen to what they need or what they feel that they need, and it involve them in the discourse.
Okay, so reaching out to them, asking them, listening, kind of purposefully bringing them into the conversation. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
Okay, good. What else?
Can we give them a small win and make them feel like they are a part of all of that?
Yes. So how could you give small wins for people to feel like they are more active in achieving the goal?
For example, like having somebody read the scripture, being
Yes.
worship something.
That's a beautiful example of a small win of moving towards that bigger goal, right? An active. Let's talk about this, passive followers. Maybe they don't have as much capacity when it comes to critical thinking, right? How could you move them more in this way? So these people, they have capacity. You ask them to, read the scripture for perhaps they'll say yes. You're kind of bringing them in. You're talking to them. What would you like to see? What about these people who I think it was Tom, were you the one who said you just got a lot of people who are not on the dance floor?
Yes. And we have a small congregation too. So, I keep trying to get some buy-in from some of our passive members to, what can we do to make you more, I guess, less passive? And try to identify with some of their needs and concerns to hopefully move them to a more exemplary follower.
How's it going?
It's a struggle. A lot of us are on the struggle bus, but I've seen some success stories too, though. I've seen some people who have been able to, who were passive, who have been able to cross that bridge and become more exemplary. But that is something we've worked together to achieve some of their own goals.
If I may just ask another follow-up question, what did you do to get them there?
I use specific examples of other people in our congregation who are more or are less passive, and how they've been able to, do something different to make a change in their, I guess, in their approach and how it's worked out for them, and see if you can't get some buy-in to at least give it a try.
Okay. So again, maybe some small wins, right?
Yes,
It,
specific examples of small wins. Yes.
it's just an example. Again, I'm giving you a lot of information just to think about leadership as a process. And really, what I wanted to do with this portion is just show how important followers are to the leadership process, and thinking about how we can bring them in more to the dance, if you will. This is another way to think about it. As far as this is by Ira Shaliff. And by the way, if you haven't read his book, The Courageous Follower, I would highly recommend that. He places it more on an axis of challenge and support. So you're really wanting people to, be willing to challenge the leader if the leader is not moving towards the goal, but also helping to support the leader following the goal, right, in achieving the goal. We all have implementers, we all have resources that might be more like the yes people or maybe the sheep, right? We also have these individualists where they're very high challenge and very low support. It's just, this is something that you want to think about too, is maybe what's causing these people to kind of be in the areas that they're choosing to live, at least in your organization. And what can you do to move them more to that partner stage? Um, all right, so we've talked a little bit about the followers. Tell me one thing from the followership piece that we just did that I guess you can use in your ministry. What's something that you've learned from the followership piece that you can use in your ministry?
I think for me, one of the things that I have to be careful about is looking at the capacity of that follower to actually move and not pushing those who don't have the capability where they're not comfortable or not capable of being. And just some of us are very good at observing dance, and that's where we ought to be, is observing dance. Some others of us need to be encouraged and
Okay,
sorting
so
that out.
to not disparage people that they're a resource, but they may not have the capacity to be an implementer or a partner. And yet they're still important to the organization. Good. What else?
And then also um, having an appreciation for the fact that everyone is not good at everything. And so, which would go back to what Bob was saying, that there are those that don't have the capacity or the training to do certain things that they'd like to do, but to understand their motivations and help to guide them in areas where they can be both helpful and productive.
Okay, so maybe not everyone is going to be have the effectiveness of being the treasurer, the church treasurer, but they might be excellent in the ability to be an usher or something of the that will play to their strengths and still help them to be active in achieving the goal. Good. How do you think about followers differently based on this conversation?
I think they're not one-dimensional. We tend to paint with a broad brush and assume everybody's in a category, and the communication between the dancers was critical. So understanding that individual's ability, knowledge, where are they on the path, and not making it a, a lump followers in your church into one category and paint with a broad brush. You get a lot of individuals and you need to communicate.
So there's got to be this communication in the dance, and not everyone is going to be able to or will engage in that dance at this in the same way.
I may be passive because I don't know the steps.
Yeah, that may be it, right? They may be passive because they don't know the steps or how to be active in achieving the goal. So maybe they do need some guidance from the leader, going back to kind of that more of a directive approach, right? Okay, so thus far we have talked about the leader and the follower achieving the goal. I really want to spend a little bit of time today also on understanding the context, because that really affects the leadership situation. I'm going to share my screen one more time here and go to this. So as I get into context, I would imagine that many of you are familiar with the concept of organizational cultures, right? I'm going to briefly go over that, but then I want to spend some time on your culture and how that particular context is affecting the leadership process. So Edgar Schein, in his book, Organizational Culture and Leadership, kind of sets I'm going to say the gold standard for this conversation around culture. It's a set of shared beliefs and behaviors that develops over time to help people learn to solve problems. And when they've proven successful, they become the accepted norm and passed down to others. So I always think of my family in this situation. So I'm not saying that this is right. I'm saying that it has worked for my family. So in my family, if I were to look at the organizational structure, we've got my mom as the matriarch. My father passed away a while ago. And then we've got the 4 children, right? And we're all, quote, equal. That's the organizational structure. But the real way the family works is I have a sister who is the favorite, and that is Rachel. Okay. So if we want to do something different as a family, it's going to have to go through Rachel, who will convince our mom. And that's just the way it works. I'm not saying it's healthy. I'm not saying it's right, but it has helped our family solve the problems that we have for, whatever they may be, well enough. Now, the thing is that when new people come into the family, like spouses, they don't know that that's the norm. So they'll say, well, we should do this. And we're talking about big decisions, little decisions. They don't know that they're supposed to go through Rachel. Right? And so, there's a famous time that we went all out to eat at a restaurant. Mom was very unimpressed. One of my brother-in-laws thought that this was the best place he had ever eaten. We walked out of the restaurant. We had obviously had very different experiences. The people that were in the family all knew that Mama wasn't happy, so ain't none of us happy. My brother-in-law didn't get that. So we all have these cultures that we're in, and your church does as well, right? So to break up those cultures, you've got your artifacts, which are kind of that top layer of the culture. What do you see, feel, touch, taste? The values, what do you say your values are? And then the assumptions. So, in my instance, the artifact was us all eating at a restaurant. Okay, well, we all seem to be eating at a restaurant. Our value is that as a family, we are not directly confrontational. We would never say, I'm not enjoying my meal at a restaurant, right? And there is this underlying assumption that if we, first of all, that we just all know because we read each other's body language. And that if you're not part of the family, then you also need to learn to read our language, right? So there's these artifacts, values, and assumptions, and that affects the way leaders are leading in a particular culture, right? So here's my question for you. If you were to describe your culture, what's working in your culture and what's not working? So in my situation, I think our culture works for the people who have been enculturated in that for the last 56 years, right? But for our spouses who come into that, it's not working, right? So what's working about your culture and what's perhaps challenging in your culture and perhaps challenging the leadership of your of the organization? What's working?
Also, I think one thing for me is I've introduced a fair amount of use of technology in a small church.
Okay.
We get about a third of our Sunday attendance via Zoom. Most of our committee meetings, all of them are hybrid, and that's become an accepted norm. What that hasn't resulted in is us being out there bringing more people into that norm.
Okay.
And so, which may not be a reasonable expectation of that change, but it is certainly a cultural change for us.
So it's a cultural change. There are benefits to that, but there's also limitations because people are not interacting as, I'm going to say, in a community as much,
Yeah. And we work
right?
very hard on trying to have community time, even via Zoom. But that's not totally successful.
Okay. All right. So a wonderful example. How might you be able to tweak that culture in order to be better prepared to accomplish your goal of growing the church and getting more people involved?
If I knew the answer to that question, I would move quickly, but I don't, I think what it has done is allowed us to be stable in that our non-mobile people are now still part of the culture, considered
Right.
still part of the church. We have our first electronic member join us last Sunday, and that's an interesting experiment for us, and we'll see how that continues to go.
So what I like about this is it shows an amazing ability to adapt. Not all cultures could adapt like that, right? Others, I think many would be afraid of technology. You are seeing some short-term wins with this first. And when you say electronic member, I'm assuming that no one's necessarily met this person except through Zoom.
Pretty much, yeah.
Great. So, that is a short-term win. Which is interesting to me because the change literature would say, well, let's celebrate those short-term wins. And how can we capitalize on those, right? So that may be something that you can think about in community to say, how can we further develop this? Good. You seem like you want to say something else. What do you want to add to that?
Well, I just celebrating that when we, pronounced her as a member of the church, everybody applauded. And that,
Okay.
was I think a good indicator that Ruth is part of the community even though she's not physically in the room.
Okay, so even the fact that there is this warmth of acceptance, that's part of the culture. People applauded. They welcomed this person that they may have never met face to face. So that's working for your culture. Good. What else is working in the culture of your churches?
I think the inviting, um, that we say we're a welcoming church, and that all are welcomed. Um, and so when individuals are invited, they see um, that welcoming spirit among us, and they become and continue to be involved. And so right now in the transition, it's redefining or uh, newly defining those values that hold the group together, and saying specifically what examples of those values and behaviors are, so that we can not have to assume that anybody that comes knows when to stand or when to sit, when to this or that, but that we are welcoming in all aspects, and we um, work with the congregations on uh, modeling that in their behavior.
Okay, so I really like that, even in that conversation there, you talked about, okay, what is our value? Our value is welcoming. What does that look like? The artifact. It sounds, I mean, an artifact can be meeting people at the door. It can also be sitting next to people in church and letting them know when to stand. Here's the hymn book, or this is, to do those things, right? Um, and and then you're also thinking about the assumptions. So a lot of people would say our value is we're a welcoming church. But when people come in, someone may shake their hand, but they may not necessarily help lead them through the service, right? And the underlying assumption is that, well, if you were one of us, you would know. So it sounds like you are really, if this is our value that we're welcoming, we're interrogating what we do to show that welcoming, and we're questioning our assumptions, right? So that's good, because many times the values don't necessarily match what you see, and there's usually an underlying assumption of why that's the case. Good. How else can you think about your church culture? Maybe what's not working? What's an artifact that you find troubling in the church? What are the assumptions that might be causing that artifact? How does it maybe challenge your value as your church?
Well, we have some artifacts in our church that are power brokers.
I'm sorry, what was that?
We have artifacts that are people that are power brokers in our church.
Ah, okay.
You have to understand that our church has been here since the early 1800s.
Yeah.
So I stepped into a situation where there have been certain people running the church for years on their
Yes.
own agendas. And I've had to step into those battles and referee those battles, let people know that, there's somebody in town now that's a new power broker that's called a pastor, and there has to be some more compromise initiated to end up with our goal in mind. So, and it's a touchy situation because these people are doing fantastic work for the church.
Mm.
But it's over the top sometimes, of course, and people come to resent it. And so I'm hopefully I'm helping straighten out the preconceived ideas that might not be true, and also hopefully help with some of the expectations turning into resentments.
Okay, so there's an artifact in your church that there are people who there are some groups, some families that that seem to be higher on the hierarchy as opposed
Yes.
to others. That this is a long-standing cultural norm.
Yes.
How does that, let's say, how does that challenge the value of what you say the church is? So
Well,
I
we're
would
saying
imagine
one thing, saying one thing and doing another, actually. So that can be evident at times. And I just, I have promised the church when I came in to be totally transparent, and so I'm trying to challenge some of the other people in church that hold a certain position or power to understand that, and not have any preconceived ideas that that's the way it should work in the future to attain success. They need to be open to looking and evaluating and possibly changing, but it's still a very difficult situation.
yeah, culture is probably the most difficult thing to change in any organization. It runs deep. New members are enculturated in this. Um, although cultures can change and do with new members, such as yourself, right, coming in as a pastor in the church. Um, I think that a lot of times leaders get hung up with um, there was Peter Drucker used to say, culture eats strategy for lunch, right? So a lot of times pastors will come into the church and say, I've got this strategy. This is what we're going to do, assuming that it can be just imposed on the culture and it doesn't work well, right? So what you're doing is you're doing the hard work of assessing the culture, what does go with the values of the church, challenging those assumptions, attempting to challenge those artifacts so they're different, um, and for them to be more in line with the values of your faith organization, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's a perfect example of kind of understanding this leadership as a process and understanding that context as opposed to being it simply leader directed, right? Um, so so yes, I acknowledge that, and I also acknowledge it as being very hard work. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
One more. What is true of your cultures? What are some positive or perhaps challenging aspects of your culture? And how does that affect your leadership? I would also encourage you to think of the broader context of the cultures that you're in, of the geographical locations, the place of being in the United States at this particular time in history, right? All of that is also a part of the cultures that you are working in. So how does the culture help enable your goals or might be inhibiting your goals?
I personally think we're sort of stuck in a culture of the 1980s where going to church was the socially accepted thing to do. And so there's an assumption that if we have a good product, people will come and, be part of us and participate in what we're doing. And I don't think that is the case anymore. And somehow we're not in a field of dreams anymore. If you build it, they will come. We've got to go out, and we're not used to going out. And so that shift is huge, because never in my 30 years here as part of this congregation have we ever gone out. We've always just produced a product that's been high quality, and that's drawn people to us. And now we're experiencing that doesn't happen anymore. So that cultural shift is, I still think there's a mentality that if we produce the right product, we'll fix our problem. And I don't think that, what additional, I want to put it, like, program can we do? What can we offer? What kind of a widget can we do that's going to make people come? And I really don't think we're there. People aren't going to come necessarily.
So the outside culture has changed, but
Yeah.
the church culture has not.
Absolutely.
They
Yeah,
haven't kind of kept up, and that is inhibiting the goals of the church.
Right. And I even think when the other gentleman was talking about the technology, we did that. We produce a pretty high quality product, and we also have got a member that lives in Tennessee that joined. She was a past member of this church that rejoined, and she participates virtually and contributes and all of that. But we're still putting out the 1980s product using current technology. We're not doing things that attract the current culture.
Yeah.
On that technology. So it's where it's a little oil and water still.
I hear you. I see Christine wants to add to the conversation.
Yeah. My feeling, it kind of piggybacks on Roger. I think in our denomination, just talk about the culture of our whole denomination, kind of sets, what he's saying out as we try to produce this wonderful, great product. But we have for so long as a denomination been known as, the old quote, the frozen chosen. The wealthy people went to Presbyterian churches, and so for our big, whatever, or even our small churches, the influential people of a communities went to Presbyterian churches. And now as a denomination, even though we have some Matthew 25 congregations, but we don't know how to put that product out that Roger's talking about, because it's not Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. It's just not like that anymore. And we don't know what to do to change, because how do you get people who are poor, who don't feel like they can contribute lots of money? How do you get them to understand that their fellowship as followers are just as important? Because we one body with different parts. They can't see that when we have this sort of frozen chosen stigma. So it makes it really hard for us to put out that message that we want something new and something different. And so I don't know how we kind of bridge that gap, even as a denomination. I don't know enough about the culture I'm moving into yet, other than the fact it's a hometown culture for me. But I just I feel like our churches as a whole our denomination as a whole has a big gap in, are we putting out what people want and need to be spiritually fulfilled? So
Yeah, so you've brought up a real important point that cultures are embedded in other cultures, right? So they're, so obviously your churches are embedded in the Presbyterian USA. There are also microcultures in your church. So it's not just one culture, it's, subcultures, the culture of the church, the larger culture of PCUSA, the larger culture of the United States, in which just fewer people are going to church, right?
right.
Unless they're this very particular brand of church, right? That doesn't necessarily comport with your culture's values. So it also may be a rethinking of what does success look like? Um what do we want to change in our values or not? All of that cultural context is coming into that leadership process. That you have to be aware of and making thoughtful choices as opposed to just making, look, I'm sure that anyone can build Jim Jones built a large church, right? So,
Right.
that can be done, but it's antithetical to pro-social values and it's also, it destroyed people. So you also want to be thoughtful about, what are we doing purposefully to work within the culture and also perhaps change the culture and keep to our values. What's up for negotiation and what's not. Um, so let me just share this last slide with you. So that's really the idea of leadership as a process, right? We've talked a lot today about the leader, developing the leader, the importance of the relationship with the follower, the importance of followers, and the context that you're in order to achieve the goal. And I would say when all of those things come together, that's that leadership moment, right? Where it's not, these aren't disjointed, but they're actually working together. So my last question for you today, before we end at noon here, is how do you think about the leadership process differently? If you've got that picture that you drew at the beginning, now what would you add? I asked you in the middle, what would you add? What would you take away? Given this, what would you add? What would you take away? How would you edit that picture? Christine.
I think I would put down underneath my little rectangle that has the leader down in the bottom and the planners up the scale and the empowered up on up. I would say below that, as a much wider base, I drew, when I was thinking about this, the Holy Spirit, the spirit of change and the spirit that brings movement in people, whether it be cultures, whether it be a process, whatever, that spirit for people to see in us what we need to be as leaders, that drives the leader themselves, that drives
Okay, so
me.
you would add a distinctly spiritual process to it,
Yeah, down
an element
below,
to the process.
that can then kind of speak to me, I guess, to say, what is it in assessment that this group of people needs? What is it that I can do best for them, relying on that higher spirit and emotional intelligence or whatever to guide me forward in that path. So
Okay. Gidget, what would you add?
Um, I guess I'll say what Christine mentioned, but I added, after we first did it, then when we went back to it, I added a cross for the goal. We're all heading towards the light, and keep focused on that, not each other so much as God. And I like what you said about the Holy Spirit, just being able to let the Holy Spirit move us where we need to be, instead of always thinking, oh, well, I know what we need, or as a group we decide, but let's pray and discern and let the Holy Spirit guide us. I like that.
It's almost like a dotted line around the leadership model of the Holy Spirit that you might add to that.
Yeah.
Good. Roger.
Yeah, I've sort of felt like throughout our discussion here today, we've had a missing element, and that is we are all following the ultimate leader here. And we haven't really talked about that. And I think that's coming to light right now, that we oftentimes feel like we're running the church like any other organization, but the church is not like any other organization.
Right.
But it's easy to lose that focus when you get down into this minutia and talk about how can I accomplish XYZ, and that it's hard to continue to keep the focus on Jesus Christ as our leader in the process. And we need to do that. And we need to call, as a leader, that's probably my ultimate calling to the followers that I have right now, is to try to continue to bang that drum and keep that focus there throughout this, not that, and all these things we've talked about are great and valid, but without that, we just become another organization, and we will not succeed as the Church of Jesus Christ. So
that invisible leader, that is so important. Well said. Jose, Tom, and Lori. Jose?
I guess my picture would change in that it would be a three-dimensional sort of, where we have the society in which we exist, the culture. There would be concentric circles leading up to the pinnacle, which would be um, godliness or the other goal. But all of those things come into play because sometimes we'll move out we'll be elevated above the society we live in into our group culture, and further elevated into these relationships where it's leadership and followership and the work towards that goal. And so we go up and down the mountain at different times. But the goal is still the godliness. And so we would move in and out of our group culture into the society and bring others along with us or be distracted by. And so it's kind of this flux towards an elevation of our goal. So and leadership is part of the process, but leadership has to be in relation. Like you said, you can't be a leader if you have no followers, and so it's the relationship and influence of the followers influencing the leader, and the leader influencing the followers, that help everyone go up that mountain to our goal.
I like that 3D model. It's another metaphor that I can kind of, think about this with. Tom and Lori?
My picture changed quite a bit from the beginning. The beginning, I had just myself as a stick figure, 2-lane road leading to the cross. And now I have all these other stick figures in there, which are the followers, right? And some that are also leaders. And You know, our Lord Jesus did so much, of course, but he didn't tell us how to run the church. So I keep defaulting to the one command that he gave us: I love everyone. And we've screwed that up pretty well too. So I default to love, and I put love under that cross too. Love everyone, as I put it, and that's quite a challenge. It can be.
Well, it's also not our cultural norm. We're a very transactional culture, right?
Yeah. I have a
And
problem loving my enemies that want to kill me, but I'm working on it.
yeah, so I think that you are working within that culture as well. So Lori, you get the last word of the day.
Well, I'll make it brief. I added more people to my picture. We're still all holding hands, but everybody's hanging on to the goals as well. I surrounded us with the artifacts of our culture, and I gave us all thought bubbles.
Okay. All right. Um, it has been, I don't want to take too much of your time. It has been a delight having this conversation with you today. Tim, thank you so much for inviting me. And yeah, I hope it was beneficial. But thank you for giving me your time.
Thank you.
If everyone can just
Thank
indulge
you.
me for just 1 second, I'm going to put the link in the chat. Somebody was talking about dancers that may not be able to dance the way that they used to. And what's beautiful is this is a shout out to a good friend of mine. This is what she did her dissertation on. She went to Cleveland and spent time with a very special dance company called Dancing Wheels. And it's all about bridging together seated dancers in wheelchairs and other dancers with different body types that don't fit the typical idea of dancer, and the art they create by adjusting the dance. So I heard that come up, and I just thought I'd share that with you all.
Yeah,
It's
I
really
like that.
inspirational. And they've actually been to Muskingum before, Robert. They've done some performances around
Really?
here. Yeah, yeah. So I just loved how you're using that tango metaphor in dance, and what happens when we have people that can't do the dance the way they used to, but you can still create beautiful dance around different bodies. And I just thought I'd share that.
I
So,
appreciate it.
and I appreciate you all taking 3 hours of your time, spending time with Robert. Robert, thank you so much. I didn't realize how much snow you all had. We have a dusting where we are. I didn't realize that you had so much.
Yeah, we've got about
And
5 inches outside. Yeah.
we have nothing like that. And I'm only an hour north of you.
An hour
So.
north. Yeah. In fact, I'm going to be there right after this. I'm going to go over to Muskingum. I'm at home now.
Well, safe travels as you're coming up. Well, thank you, everyone. You may be getting an email follow-up from Heather or from myself just to see what you liked about the workshop, some other ideas that we can have for future workshops, and just to get some feedback from you all. You all have a great lunch and a great day, and happy Valentine's Day. I hope you have some lovely plans.
Thanks,
I'll
everybody.
be going to the movies to watch the new Marvel movie. That's what I'll be doing. So
Good for you. See you later, everybody.
Take
All right,
care.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bless you.
Bye-bye. God bless.
Bye bye, Gidget.
Bless.